The hall of the Galactic Council stretched farther than the human eye could measure. Beams of soft light floated through the air, reflecting from the crystal walls that pulsed like living veins. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in silent rows, their strange forms glowing faintly under the light. It was the first time in the history of the galaxy that a human had been invited to stand among them. And that human was not a soldier, not a conqueror, but a messenger of peace. The envoy walked slowly through the long silver corridor that led to the council's main floor. Every step echoed softly, and though the face was calm, the heart behind it carried the weight of billions of people. The air was cold and thin, mixed with scents no one on Earth could name. The guards at the entrance, tall beings with metallic skin and 4 shining eyes, watched the envoy with quiet suspicion. They had been told that humans were unpredictable, emotional creatures, capable of kindness or destruction depending on which side of them you met. When the great doors opened, the hall grew silent. Thousands of eyes in all shapes and colors turned toward the single human stepping forward. The moment felt heavier than time itself. The envoy's voice, though soft, carried clearly through the chamber. They greeted the council with respect, thanking them for allowing Earth a seat at the table of galactic civilization. The translation devices shimmered as the words echoed across hundreds of languages. For a moment, everything felt possible. Some delegates nodded politely, their faces unreadable. Others whispered to one another, their expressions tense. Humanity had grown fast, too fast in the eyes of many. Within a single century, they had gone from a single-planet species to explorers of deep space. They had built ships capable of bending light, colonized moons, and survived wars that would have wiped out weaker races. To some in the council, that made humanity impressive. To others, it made them dangerous. The envoy spoke about unity, about building bridges instead of barriers. They talked about how the galaxy was large enough for everyone to thrive, how Earth wished not for conquest but for friendship. Each word was calm, carefully chosen, filled with honesty. Yet, even as they spoke, there were those who did not want peace. In the back rows, certain council members exchanged looks that carried silent messages. They saw humanity's progress as a threat to the old order, one that had kept them powerful for ages. When the envoy finished, the room filled with the sound of quiet breathing and flickering light. The council chair rose, a towering being whose voice sounded like wind over metal. It praised Earth's progress, but beneath the polite words there was a thin layer of warning. The chair reminded everyone that harmony in the galaxy was built on trust, and trust could not exist without obedience. The envoy simply bowed, replying that Earth understood but would never trade its freedom for acceptance. That line stirred whispers through the room. The word freedom echoed differently for each species. For some, it meant chaos. For others, it was a dream they had long forgotten. The envoy's words carried weight, and weight was dangerous in a place built on fragile balance. After the meeting, the envoy was escorted to private quarters inside the council's complex. The room was grand yet cold, filled with technology that responded to thoughts. They stood near the transparent wall, looking out at the endless city of lights below. Ships drifted through the air like fireflies, and beyond them stretched the black ocean of space. Somewhere out there was Earth, glowing blue and alive, waiting for news of how this meeting went. The envoy remembered the faces back home, the scientists, the children waving flags, the people watching the broadcast through trembling hands. All of humanity's hope rested on this single mission. If peace could be built here, then no war would ever have to follow. The envoy whispered to themselves that they would not fail, but not everyone shared that hope. In a quiet chamber below the main hall, certain members of the council met in secret. Their voices were low and cold. They spoke of how humanity's rise would eventually break the balance of power. One alien with translucent skin argued that humans were too emotional, too attached to their sense of justice. Another said that allowing them into the council would encourage rebellion among lesser species. After a long silence, the decision was made, not officially but with mutual understanding. If the human envoy became a symbol, that symbol had to be removed before it could grow. Back in the envoy's quarters, a faint vibration rippled through the floor. The lights flickered for a second, then steadied. The envoy didn't notice the shadow moving outside the door, or the silent exchange between 2 guards in the hallway. They were still looking out at the city of lights, recording a short message to Earth, a message filled with optimism, one that would be broadcast the next day after the council's public address. That night passed in quiet calm. Stars blinked softly beyond the window. But in the stillness, machines were moving, plans were forming, and a storm was beginning to gather behind polite smiles. The council's next public meeting was set to be a grand event, a celebration of unity watched across the galaxy. Billions of beings would tune in to see humanity officially welcomed among the stars. The envoy would stand in front of them, wearing the emblem of Earth, speaking words of peace once again. And among those who watched, some planned to ensure those words would never be finished. When morning came, the envoy prepared calmly. The light filtering through the window looked almost like dawn back home. They adjusted the collar of their suit, took one deep breath, and stepped into the corridor. The guards stood waiting. Their faces were unreadable, but something about their silence felt heavier than before. Still, the envoy smiled politely, not wanting to seem suspicious or afraid. As they walked toward the council hall once more, thousands of beings filled the vast chamber, cameras floating in the air. The sound of voices blended into a deep hum that felt alive. When the envoy took their place at the podium, the crowd went quiet. They began to speak, their words calm, carrying the same message of peace and understanding. Every sentence seemed to reach deeper into the hearts of those listening. Even some who had doubted humans before began to feel respect. And yet, high above the stage, in the balcony reserved for security, a pair of eyes followed every movement. The council guards were supposed to protect the envoy, but one of them carried a secret order. The weapon hidden beneath the armor hummed faintly, charged with energy. The command had been simple and cruel: make it look like an accident, and the message would never reach Earth. The envoy continued to speak, unaware of the danger, unaware that this moment, this fragile bridge of peace, was about to collapse in a single heartbeat. When they lifted their hand to make the final point, a sudden flash of light burst from above. For a brief second, the hall filled with shock and confusion. The envoy staggered, their voice breaking, and the crowd froze in disbelief. Then the silence shattered into chaos. No one knew who fired. No one moved at first. The great chamber filled with the sound of alarms, shouts, and the echo of something terrible and irreversible. Far away, in a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, billions of people would soon see the footage. But at that moment, in that shining hall, only one truth was clear. The envoy of Earth, who came carrying words of peace, had fallen before ever being heard completely. And in that instant, without anyone realizing it yet, the galaxy had changed forever. The entire hall was frozen in silence. For a few long seconds, no one moved. No one even breathed. The bright light that had filled the chamber a moment ago faded, leaving behind only the echo of confusion and fear. The human envoy lay still on the cold floor of the council hall, the words of peace still lingering in the air like a ghost that refused to fade. The council guards rushed forward, pretending to restore order. The crowd of alien delegates shouted in dozens of voices, their languages overlapping like a storm. Some demanded to know what happened, others accused, and a few quietly turned away as if they had seen this coming. Cameras that were recording the ceremony flickered, trying to process what had just happened. Billions across the galaxy watched in shock as the live broadcast suddenly cut to black. For a long time, no one spoke about what truly happened that day. The official statement came within hours. The Galactic Council released a short message saying the envoy's death was a tragic accident caused by a technical malfunction in one of the security drones. They said the council deeply regretted the event and would conduct a full investigation. They promised justice, but even as the words were being read, the truth was already being buried under lies. In the hours that followed, the corridors of the council building were filled with hushed voices. Some delegates whispered that they had seen a guard raise a weapon deliberately. Others said they saw nothing at all, afraid to be dragged into the storm that was forming. The few who dared to question the official report were quietly removed from the building, their passes revoked, their names erased from the guest list. Outside the council world, news spread like wildfire. The message could not be fully erased. Fragments of the footage leaked into the networks, just enough to show the envoy standing at the podium, just enough to show the flash of light, just enough to show them fall. That was all humanity needed to see. On Earth, people gathered in silence around their screens. The image of the envoy's final moment replayed again and again. There were no speeches, no outbursts of anger at first, only stillness. Mothers held their children close. Workers stopped their machines. Soldiers stood frozen in their bases, watching the one who had spoken for them collapse under the so-called protection of the Council. The governments of Earth met in urgency. In quiet rooms filled with screens and faint light, they argued, mourned, and questioned. Some leaders wanted to demand the truth immediately. Others said to stay calm, to wait, to not risk war. But beneath the calm words, a storm was already forming in their hearts. Humanity had seen this pattern before, when power silenced truth, when justice was promised but never delivered. For the first few days, humanity waited. No ships left their ports. No messages were sent. The Council believed Earth had accepted their version of the story. They mistook silence for submission. They didn't know that silence in human history had always been the sound before something great awakened. In the great spaceports of Mars, engineers worked day and night without being told. They said they were maintaining ships for defense, but everyone knew it was more than that. In the orbital factories around Earth, production quietly shifted. The assembly lines that once built exploration vessels now produce something heavier, stronger, and far more dangerous. Across the colonies on Luna, Europa, and Titan, pilots were recalled to duty without public announcement. They gathered not out of hate, but because they could no longer stay still. Everywhere on Earth, people lit candles for the Envoy. No one ordered them to. It became a quiet ritual across cities, villages, and space stations. Billions of tiny flames glowed in the dark, each one representing not anger but sorrow. The world mourned together as one, something that hadn't happened in centuries. Meanwhile, in the Council's inner chambers, fear began to grow. The delegates noticed that the usual human transmissions had gone silent. The diplomatic channels that were always open now showed no response. The humans, known for their endless talk, had suddenly stopped communicating. The silence felt like a shadow stretching across the stars. A few council members demanded that a new envoy be sent to Earth to calm things down. Others refused, saying it was too dangerous. They still believed that humanity was too small to challenge the might of the entire galaxy. They had seen the humans as emotional, impulsive beings, too fragile to fight back. They thought they had time, but they were wrong. Weeks passed and strange signals began to appear near the outer systems. Scout ships reported movements near human space. Massive energy signatures coming from shipyards. Some signals went dark before they could transmit details. The Council's intelligence division tried to investigate, but no probes returned. Something enormous was being built, something hidden behind silence and secrecy. Back on Earth, the leaders met once more. The room was dim, filled with faces marked by exhaustion and grief. They all knew what had to be done. The envoy had gone in peace and never returned. The Council had called it an accident, but humanity knew the truth deep in its bones. The message was clear. Peace had been taken for weakness. The oldest admiral among them said softly that humanity had two choices: either accept humiliation forever, or remind the galaxy that respect was not given. It was earned. The room went silent again. No one voted. No one needed to. The decision had already been made in every human heart the moment the envoy fell. As the sun rose over Earth, giant hangar doors opened across continents. Warships that had been in reserve for decades powered up for the first time. The deep rumble of engines shook the oceans. In orbit, fleets aligned into silent formations waiting for the command. They carried no flags of war, only the simple emblem of Earth, the blue sphere surrounded by white rings. But this was not yet war. It was preparation, born not from hate but from resolve. Humanity did not want to destroy. It wanted to be understood. Yet they knew that sometimes to be heard, one must speak in a language the powerful could no longer ignore. Across the galaxy, whispers spread that Earth was mobilizing. Many refused to believe it. Others watched nervously, sensing that something massive was unfolding. The Council tried to reassure the public that everything was under control, that humanity would soon calm down. But even the Council's own guards began to doubt. They had seen the recording too. They knew the truth could not stay buried forever. In the far reaches of space near the edge of human territory, something new came online. A ship unlike any ever built by Earth or any species before. It was vast and silent, its hull covered in living metal that shimmered like a shadowed star. The crew called it the Messenger of the Fallen. It was built not just as a weapon, but as a symbol, one that would carry the memory of the Envoy to every corner of the galaxy. And so, while the Council argued and the galaxy speculated, humanity prepared quietly. They did not rush. They did not threaten. They simply worked, patient and focused, with a calm that frightened those who were watching. In the months that followed, the sky above Earth began to glow brighter at night. Fleets were assembling, their formations stretching across the heavens. From the surface, people looked up and saw what looked like constellations moving. Children pointed, asking if those were stars. Their parents didn't answer. They just watched, remembering the Envoy who once spoke of peace and wondering if that dream had truly died, or if it was only transforming into something new. Deep in the void, where light from distant suns faded, the first wave of human ships disappeared into faster-than-light drives. No one outside Earth knew where they were headed. No one understood what was coming. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had made a mistake. They had taken the life of one who came in peace, and now, the silence of humanity was no longer a pause. It was the calm before something the stars themselves would remember forever. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the last recording from the Envoy still floated between the signals, unfinished words that said, "Let this be the beginning of peace." But peace, it seemed, had been rewritten in the language of consequence. The footage of the Envoy's final moments spread across every human world like a quiet storm. It appeared on personal screens, public walls, and deep space transmissions. The video was short, only a few seconds long, but those few seconds changed everything. People watched in disbelief as the Envoy smiled, began to speak, and then fell. That image burned itself into the hearts of billions. Humanity did not shout, did not cry out for revenge. Instead, it fell silent. It was the kind of silence that came before something powerful awoke. At first, the Council's version of the story seemed to hold. Their spokesperson appeared on the interstellar network, repeating that the event was a tragic accident. They said a security drone had malfunctioned, that no one was to blame. But their tone felt hollow, rehearsed, as if even they didn't believe their own words. In the background of the broadcast, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something. The same guards who had been near the Envoy that day were missing. No one spoke of them again. Earth's media asked for answers, but the Council gave none. They closed their communication channels, claiming they were still investigating. Days turned into weeks. The investigation never ended. The truth never came. The silence grew heavier. In cities across Earth and the colonies, people gathered in open spaces to light candles. They didn't call it a protest. It was a vigil, quiet, united, and endless. Whole streets glowed under the light of candles stretching for miles. People stood shoulder to shoulder, not speaking a word. The faces of the young and old reflected the same emotion, a deep sadness mixed with something unspoken, something steady and dangerous. In orbit, the fleets that had once explored and traded now stood in perfect stillness. Commanders received no new orders, yet every ship was being prepared. Weapons were checked. Engines were tested. Supplies were quietly loaded. It wasn't a call to war, not yet. It was simply readiness. Every pilot knew that the day might come when silence would no longer be enough. On Mars, engineers worked without rest. They said they were repairing exploration crafts, but inside the hangars, the sound of welding and hammering told a different story. The blueprints being followed were old, designs once shelved when peace seemed possible. Now they were being rebuilt, stronger and faster. Back on Earth, the leaders met in secret under the gray sky of early morning. The room was filled with tired faces. No one spoke for a while. Everyone already knew what the others were thinking. The representative from the lunar colonies finally broke the silence. They said that if humanity did not stand up now, then no one would ever respect them again. The death of the Envoy was not only a wound to Earth, it was a message to every species that humans could be silenced without consequence. That, they said, could not be allowed. Still, there were those who hesitated. Some leaders argued that war would destroy everything humanity had built. They said they could not risk all their progress over one act of cruelty. Others answered that peace without dignity was not peace at all. The debate went on through the night, voices rising and falling, until finally the oldest among them spoke softly. "If we do nothing, we will teach the galaxy that the life of a human means nothing. If we act, we remind them who we are." That was when the decision was made, not with cheers, not with anger, but with quiet agreement. Humanity would not declare war. They would not send threats. They would simply begin to prepare for the truth that peace had failed. As the weeks passed, new activity began across every human system. Massive transports carried supplies between the colonies, but their routes were kept secret. Asteroid stations once used for mining now glowed at night with the light of construction. In the vastness of space, something was being built, something so large that its shadow stretched across entire regions of stars. Meanwhile, the Council grew uneasy. Reports arrived that human patrols were refusing to answer hails. Trade ships had stopped moving. The ambassadors they tried to send to Earth were turned away before even entering orbit. The Council's analysts tried to predict what was happening, but no one could understand it. How could a single species so young and small turn their silence into such an invisible power? Behind closed doors, the Council began to argue among themselves. Some believed they should reach out to humanity again and apologize. Others said the humans were bluffing. They believed that humanity's technology was still far behind the great powers of the galaxy. They saw humans as emotional creatures, too passionate, too proud, too impulsive. They thought Earth's silence was a sign of confusion, not discipline. They were wrong. The truth was, humanity had learned something that most species had forgotten: the power of unity born from loss. Across every human settlement, people who once disagreed on everything now stood together. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, and civilians all shared one thought: never again. Deep in the Pacific Ocean, hidden under the waves, shipyards the size of cities came alive. The air shimmered as massive vessels rose from the water, their hulls reflecting sunlight like silver. These ships were not for conquest, they were for protection, a promise written in metal. On the dark side of the moon, another project came to life. A silent fleet waited in the shadows, its engines cold but ready. Pilots sat in their seats staring at the stars, knowing that when they launched, everything would change. They didn't know where the order would come from or when, but they knew it would come, and still the people on Earth lived their daily lives. Children went to school, factories continued to hum, and life went on. But beneath that calm surface was a quiet determination. Every person, from the farmers in the fields to the workers in orbit, knew they were part of something larger than themselves. Humanity had been wounded, but they were healing in a way the galaxy would not expect. One night, a faint signal reached Earth. It came from deep space, near the edge of known territory. It was a message from a small human scout ship that had been stationed near Council space. The transmission was broken, full of static, but a few words were clear. "They're afraid of us now." That short message spread across the human network like fire. It wasn't pride that people felt, it was purpose. They understood that fear was not their goal, but respect was, and respect could only come when others realized that humanity's patience was not weakness. The following month, something extraordinary happened. Every human ship, military, trade, or exploration, activated their beacon lights at the same time. From orbit, it looked like Earth was surrounded by a web of shining stars. Across the colonies, people stood outside and looked up. They saw the lights and understood what they meant. Humanity was not hiding anymore. The Council watched from afar, nervous and uncertain. They tried to reopen communication, but Earth remained silent. One Council delegate said, "The humans are planning something," but no one listened. They were still blinded by arrogance. They believed they could control the story, but humanity had already written a new one. Soon after, the first of the massive ships left Earth's orbit. It was named not in anger but in memory, built to carry the legacy of the fallen Envoy. It moved slowly at first, its engines glowing like a blue sunrise against the black of space. Around it, smaller ships followed in perfect formation. They didn't speak. They didn't announce their mission. They simply vanished into the darkness beyond the stars. The galaxy watched in silence. Some species cheered quietly, believing that at last someone would stand up to the Council's power. Others feared what would come next. The Council tried to reassure everyone that there was no danger, that the humans were simply mourning. But deep down, even they felt the shift in the air. Something ancient had awakened, a strength that came not from technology but from conviction. Back on Earth, the last candlelight vigils were still burning. Families stood together, looking at the stars where their fleets had gone. The image of the Envoy was still shown on every screen, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of why humanity stood united. No one knew what would happen next. But every person, every colony, every ship shared the same quiet thought. The Council had silenced one voice, but in doing so they had awakened billions. And those billions now moved as one. The tragedy that began in a grand hall among distant stars had now become something far greater. A promise that would change the shape of the galaxy forever. The peace that once was broken had not vanished. It had only taken a new form, stronger, deeper, and ready to rise from the darkness. The stars around human space had never been so quiet. Ships that once carried explorers, merchants, and travelers now floated in silence, waiting for orders that had not yet been spoken aloud. It was as if the entire human race was holding its breath at the same time. No messages were sent to the Galactic Council. No ambassadors were received. The wide communication networks that once connected hundreds of worlds were now sealed shut. From the outside it looked like fear, but in truth it was focus. Humanity was no longer asking for peace. It was preparing to make the galaxy understand what peace really meant. Inside the orbital shipyards above Earth, the work never stopped. The air vibrated with the hum of machines and the deep rhythm of engines coming to life. Thousands of engineers, mechanics, and pilots worked side by side. They barely spoke. Every person knew what they were building was more than just a fleet. It was a voice, one that would speak for the Envoy who never came home. The new ships were larger than anything the galaxy had seen before, built not only with power but with purpose. Every screw, every plate of armor, every glowing core carried the memory of the fallen Envoy. In the deep bases under Mars, scientists worked in long tunnels filled with dust and metal. They studied old technologies, revived forgotten plans, and improved them beyond imagination. Some of these projects had been shelved for decades, marked as too ambitious, too dangerous, too costly. Now there was no hesitation. Humanity no longer measured progress by cost, only by meaning. On the moon, soldiers trained day and night. The quiet halls echoed with footsteps and orders. No one spoke about revenge. Instead, they talked about responsibility. They believed that if humanity did not act, no one else ever would. It wasn't about pride, it was about justice, about showing that life, every life, mattered. The Envoy had carried the hope of billions, and now that hope had become an unbreakable chain linking every human heart. From orbit, Earth looked peaceful, wrapped in a soft blue glow. But beyond that calm face, its people were united like never before. Old arguments that once divided nations no longer mattered. Borders meant nothing now. Humanity was not a collection of countries anymore. It was one world, one voice. Every broadcast, every gathering, every silent prayer carried the same unspoken message. Never again. In the colonies across the solar system, people worked together with the same determination. Miners on the icy moons of Jupiter extracted rare elements without rest. On Titan, massive energy plants powered new engines being tested in deep space. Even children helped, writing messages that were later engraved on the sides of new ships. Words like for peace, for unity, and for the Envoy. The Council, watching from afar, still did not understand what was happening. Their intelligence network sent back confusing reports. They saw the silence, but they couldn't read its meaning. Some members of the Council believed humans were grieving. Others worried that something darker was forming behind that quiet. But most of them dismissed the concern. They had seen this pattern before. New species rising, growing too fast, burning bright, then fading away. They told themselves humanity was no different. But there was one thing the Council didn't understand. Humanity was not burning out. It was becoming something new. The silence was not weakness. It was strength gathering itself. The day came when the first wave of human ships left orbit. They moved without announcement, without music, without ceremony. There were no speeches or broadcasts, only a calm departure. The engines flared to life, and the ships disappeared one by one into faster-than-light space. They didn't say where they were going. But the galaxy would soon find out. In the days that followed, strange signals began to reach the outer systems. Unknown fleets were sighted near the borders of Council-controlled space. Patrol ships tried to approach, but their sensors failed before they could even see what was coming. Then the signals vanished, leaving only static. The Council sent more scouts. None returned. Back on Earth, the quiet continued. Families looked up at the night sky, watching for a sign of their fleets. Some people still hoped that peace was possible. Others knew that peace had already been broken beyond repair. In the heart of the human capital, a monument was being built, a tall, shining structure reaching toward the sky. At its base was a single line carved in stone. They took one voice. We became millions. The council finally sent a message to Earth, a long and carefully written statement expressing sorrow for the envoy's death and promising new negotiations. But humanity did not respond. Days passed, then weeks. The silence from Earth became unbearable. The council grew restless. They called for a special session to discuss the situation, but even in that great hall, fear crept into their words. One of the elder delegates warned that they had misjudged humanity. They do not scream, the delegate said. They do not threaten. They prepare. Others laughed, saying that humans were too few to matter in the grand scale of the galaxy. They believed that a race that had just begun its journey among the stars could not possibly challenge them. While they argued, something was already approaching. In the far reaches of space, human ships formed into vast formations. From a distance, they looked like constellations, glowing softly against the dark. The flagship led the way, its hull black and silent, its engines burning a deep, steady blue. It carried no weapons on display, only a message encoded into its transmission beacon. The message was not a declaration of war. It simply said, "We remember." In every corner of human space, people listened to the same quiet broadcast. The voice of an old pilot came through, calm and steady. He spoke not of hate, but of unity, of protecting what mattered most. His words spread like light through the darkness, reaching every home, every station, every colony. When he finished speaking, he said, "We will not attack, but we will never bow again." Those words became a promise written in the hearts of all who heard them. Humanity was not looking for revenge. It was looking for dignity. Meanwhile, in the council's capital, unease grew stronger. Their fleets began to gather, forming defensive lines near the border of human space. They told their citizens that it was only a precaution, that peace talks were still possible. But deep down they felt it, the weight of something coming. The quiet was too complete, too focused, too human. On the outskirts of the galaxy, a trader ship stumbled upon one of the new human vessels. The crew later reported what they saw before their communication went dark. They described a ship the size of a small moon, its surface alive with light, its silence more terrifying than any weapon. It didn't fire, didn't speak. It simply passed by like a shadow with purpose. When that report reached the council, it caused panic. Some demanded that humanity be stopped before it grew too strong. Others pleaded for peace. But by then it was too late. The humans were no longer seeking approval or forgiveness. They were writing their own place in the galaxy. Back on Earth, people continued their daily lives. Farmers worked their fields. Teachers spoke to children about the stars. Life did not stop. But there was a new strength in everyone's eyes, a calm certainty that the future belonged to them now. They had learned the hardest truth, that peace was not something given but something protected. As night fell, the lights of the great fleets could be seen moving slowly across the horizon. Children pointed at them, whispering stories about their missions. Parents stood quietly beside them, proud and sad at the same time. They knew that those ships carried more than soldiers and machines. They carried the memory of a voice silenced too soon, and the hope of billions who refused to forget. The council still waited for an answer that would never come. They could not understand why humans stayed silent. They didn't realize that silence was the answer. Humanity had already spoken, not with words, but with unity, preparation, and strength. The heavens were quiet, but not for long. The stars themselves seemed to tremble, sensing that something powerful was about to unfold. And in that calm before the storm, one truth became clear: humanity had changed forever. They had once come in peace, and their hand had been struck down. Now they would rise not to destroy, but to ensure that no one ever silenced them again. The night sky over Earth looked peaceful, but beneath that beauty something powerful was rising. Humanity had gone silent, not out of fear, but out of choice. The fleets that left Earth weeks ago were now deep in the black void of space, crossing star systems that had never seen a human ship before. They moved quietly like a wave spreading outward, unseen but unstoppable. No one spoke about revenge anymore. Those days were gone. What lived now was purpose. Humanity was not going to destroy, but to show the galaxy what it meant to be underestimated. Each ship carried more than weapons. It carried stories. On every deck there were memories of those who had built them, who had worked day and night without sleep, believing in something greater than themselves. The engines hummed softly, almost like a heartbeat. Every soldier, every pilot, every engineer on board knew they were part of something that would change history. In the command center of the lead fleet, the captain stood by the main screen, watching stars drift slowly by. There was no rush. Every decision was measured, every move thought out. They knew they were being watched. The Galactic Council's probes had been tracking them from afar, sending reports back to their capital. But even with all their advanced technology, they couldn't truly see what humans were doing. The new ships were built with layers of shielding that confused alien sensors. To outsiders, they looked like moving shadows. Messages started spreading across Council worlds, rumors of giant human fleets moving toward the outer territories. Some laughed, saying humans were bluffing. Others began to worry. On certain planets, fear started to grow quietly in people's hearts. They had all heard stories of what happened to the Envoy, how humans had once offered peace and been betrayed. And now that silence from Earth was beginning to feel heavy. Back home, Earth was still and focused. The factories continued to run without pause. On the ocean floors, new shipyards were hidden deep beneath the waves. They built smaller crafts fast and light, designed to move like shadows across the stars. In orbit, massive stations were being constructed, part defense, part research. Humanity was not just preparing for war, it was preparing for survival. Across the colonies, the same energy spread. People who once argued about politics, beliefs, or nations were now united by one truth. They were all human. Even those who lived far away on Mars, who had never seen Earth with their own eyes, felt that unity inside them. For the first time in centuries, humanity spoke with one voice. One night, a broadcast appeared across human channels. It wasn't from any leader or government. It came from a worker, a technician who had helped build the ships. Her words were simple and calm. She said, "We were once divided. Now we are one. We are not marching to conquer, but to stand where no one can harm us again." That short message spread everywhere, shared across every human system. People felt pride rising inside them. Far from Earth, one of the human fleets entered the edge of Council-controlled space. The stars here were colder, dimmer. There were small mining stations and patrol routes, but no large military presence. The first human ships didn't attack. Instead, they sent a single signal, a transmission that carried the image of Earth, blue and calm, and beneath it, a single phrase, "We do not forget." The stations that received the message didn't know what to do. They tried to respond, but no reply came back. Their governments told them to stay silent, to avoid any provocation. Yet deep down, everyone who saw that signal felt something, an uneasy respect. Meanwhile, in the Council's main chamber, leaders gathered once again. The air was thick with tension. Reports came in from all sides. Unknown fleets sighted, communication blackouts, stations losing contact. Some demanded that the Council prepare for defense. Others insisted that humans would never dare to start a real conflict. But one elder delegate who had studied human history stood and spoke quietly. "They are not coming to destroy," the delegate said. "They are coming to remind us of what we did, and they will not stop until we listen." Still, the Council chose arrogance over wisdom. They increased their military presence near human borders. Massive fleets gathered, their ships shining bright with energy. But what they didn't know was that the humans were already among them, watching, scanning, learning. In deep space, hidden behind nebula clouds and asteroid fields, human reconnaissance ships moved silently. They mapped enemy routes, studied their communications, and gathered everything they needed. They didn't fire a single shot. Their strength came not from fear, but from patience. On one of those small ships, a young pilot stared at the stars outside her window. She had never seen war before. She didn't hate anyone, not even those who had caused the Envoy's death, but she felt a quiet determination inside her chest. She whispered to herself, "We're not fighting for revenge. We're fighting so that no one ever treats us like that again." Her words echoed the thoughts of millions back home. Humanity was not seeking to be feared, it wanted to be respected. Weeks later, the first major contact happened. A Council patrol of 20 ships crossed into human-claimed space. They demanded to speak with a representative, saying they came in peace, But humans had learned the cost of blind trust. Instead of responding, they simply surrounded the patrol with hundreds of invisible ships that had been waiting there, cloaked and silent. The council commander froze. The human ships didn't fire, didn't move, they just held their position. It was a message: we see you. We could, but we won't. The patrol turned around and left, shaken to the core. The report they sent back caused chaos in the council. Some called for immediate peace talks. Others called for full-scale war. The unity that once held the council together began to crack. On Earth, the people watched the news quietly. They didn't cheer or celebrate. They knew this was just the beginning. They were strong now, but they also knew that strength came with a price. Every soldier understood that they might not return home, yet none hesitated. Humanity had found something stronger than fear: duty. In the far reaches of human space, the fleets began constructing new stations, setting up communication relays and defense lines. The humans were not hiding anymore. They were claiming their place among the stars. Every outpost carried the same flag, the symbol of Earth surrounded by the stars of all its colonies. That flag became a promise to future generations. No one would ever silence humanity again. The council sent one final message. It was cautious, polite, filled with diplomatic language. They offered to open peace discussions again. But humanity didn't answer right away. For the first time in galactic history, the council waited nervously for a reply from a younger species. When the answer finally came, it wasn't what they expected. It was short, calm, and powerful. We offered peace once. You answered with betrayal. We will not make the same mistake twice. If you want peace now, you will have to prove you deserve it. That message spread like fire through every star system. Some called it arrogance. Others called it courage. But everyone knew one thing: the balance of power had shifted forever. Humanity was no longer the newcomer in the galaxy. It had become something more, something the universe had never seen before. Back on Earth, the people didn't see themselves as conquerors. They still looked up at the stars with wonder, dreaming not of war but of survival and respect. Children grew up hearing stories not of hatred but of unity. The memory of the Envoy lived on, not as a wound, but as a lesson. The fleets continued to move deeper into the unknown, carrying the light of humanity wherever they went. Each planet they passed, each system they explored, they left behind a message of strength wrapped in silence. The galaxy was beginning to realize that humans didn't need to roar to be heard. Their silence spoke louder than any weapon ever could. And somewhere, in the quiet dark between stars, a single thought echoed across the cosmos, a truth that every civilization would one day understand. Humanity had arrived, and it would never bow again. The great silence after the Council's message was long and deep. Across the galaxy, millions waited to see what humanity would do next. Some expected war, others hoped for peace. But the humans did not rush. They had learned the value of patience, the kind that builds strength rather than fear. The stars were quiet, but behind that quietness, humanity was preparing for something far greater than anyone could imagine. On Earth, every city glowed like a small sun. The planet had changed, faster than any world before it. Factories that once built cars now built engines for ships. Farms grew food not just for Earth, but for distant colonies scattered across new worlds. People didn't speak about countries anymore. They spoke about humanity as one people, one home. That unity was something no other species had ever truly achieved. The new generation had grown up hearing stories of the Envoy, who went to bring peace and never returned. They didn't remember the pain directly, but they carried the fire of that memory inside them. They didn't hate the Council, but they promised themselves they would never kneel to anyone again. In orbit around Earth, hundreds of massive ships floated in silence. Each one carried not only soldiers and scientists, but also historians, engineers, teachers, and artists. Because humanity wasn't preparing only for defense, it was preparing for a future among the stars. The goal was not just survival, but meaning. The people wanted to build a civilization that could stand proud, not as conquerors, but as creators. The Council, far away on its shining capital world, began to crumble under the weight of its own fear. Inside their grand halls, once filled with confidence, there was now confusion. Some leaders whispered that humanity should be invited back, that maybe peace could still be rebuilt. Others shouted that humans were too dangerous, that their silence was the quiet before destruction. Every day their arguments grew louder. The truth was simple. The Council was breaking apart, not because of human weapons, but because of human resolve. No threat, no army, no speech could shake them, and that unshakable spirit scared the galaxy more than any fleet ever could. One evening, deep in space, one of humanity's forward stations detected a signal. It wasn't an attack, it was a message. The signal was weak, almost fading, but its source was traced to a small world once controlled by the Council. When the message was decoded, it revealed something surprising. A group of alien civilizations had broken away from the Council and wanted to speak directly with humans. Their message was humble. They said, "We were not part of what happened to your envoy. We have watched what followed, and we understand now what the Council did was wrong. We don't seek power, only truth." The humans read that message carefully. They didn't respond right away. For days, the leaders of Earth discussed what to do. Some said this could be a trap. Others said it was the first real step toward peace. In the end, humanity decided to listen, not because they trusted easily, but because they believed that change must start somewhere. A single ship was sent. It wasn't a warship, but a diplomatic vessel. Small, simple, and peaceful in appearance. The humans who went aboard it knew the risks, but they went willingly. When they arrived at the neutral planet, they found a small gathering of alien envoys waiting for them. There was fear on both sides, but also curiosity. The first few words exchanged were careful, slow, but as they talked, something began to shift. The humans didn't speak with pride or anger. They spoke with honesty. They shared how Earth had once been divided, how people fought among themselves for centuries, and how they eventually learned that unity was the only way forward. They didn't hide their pain, they turned it into a lesson. The aliens listened quietly. For the first time, they saw not the image of humanity painted by the Council, but the truth of what humans really were: survivors, builders, and dreamers. Over the following weeks, those talks grew into something real. Agreements were made. Plans were drawn. A new alliance began to take shape, one that was not ruled by fear or tradition, but by mutual respect. The humans called it the Circle of Light because it represented hope shared equally among all who joined. When news of this alliance reached the Council, panic spread. They tried to issue warnings claiming humanity was manipulating others, but it was too late. Dozens of smaller civilizations began to pull away from the Council, tired of living under its control. They saw in humanity something they had lost long ago: the courage to stand free. Back on Earth, people watched as new ships arrived in orbit. They carried alien visitors, some coming in peace, others just to see the planet they had once only heard about. The sight was extraordinary. Beings of every shape and color walking on Earth's soil, trading ideas, learning languages, and sharing knowledge. The dream that the Envoy once carried in their heart was finally becoming real. Still, not everything was perfect. There were those who still distrusted humans, who believed the Council would one day return with vengeance. The galaxy was full of tension, like a storm waiting to break. Humanity knew this, but they didn't hide from it. They continued to prepare, not for war, but for protection. They built new defense lines, new technologies, and better ways to communicate across stars. They didn't want to rule. They wanted to last. One night, the leaders of the Circle of Light gathered on a floating platform orbiting a quiet moon. They looked out at the stars together. One of the humans stood up and spoke softly. The Envoy's dream was not just peace. It was understanding. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again. The room fell silent, and then every representative there nodded in agreement. From that day forward, a new chapter began. The humans and their allies started exploring together. They built shared colonies, research stations, and learning centers where children from different worlds studied side by side. Slowly, trust began to grow. As years passed, the galaxy changed in ways no one could have predicted. Where once there had been fear, there was now curiosity. Where there had been walls, there were bridges. Humanity had gone from being the newest and most mistrusted species to the one others looked up to. Not because of power, but because of persistence. The memory of the Envoy who had fallen was never forgotten. On Earth, a monument was built, not a statue of war, but of peace. It showed a single hand reaching out to the stars, surrounded by the words, "We speak not through fear, but through light." Every year, people from across the galaxy visited that monument. Even members of the old Council, now humbled and quiet, came to pay their respects. The world that had once stood alone was now the center of a new age of cooperation. But even then, humanity never grew arrogant. They knew the stars were vast and full of unknown dangers. They kept exploring, learning, and growing. They built ships not to conquer, but to connect. Each new discovery was treated as a step forward for everyone, not just themselves. One evening, as Earth's sun set, an old man stood at the base of the monument. He had been one of the engineers who built the first ships after the Envoy's death. Looking up at the sky, he smiled softly and said, "We did not avenge them with fire. We honored them with light." Above him, the stars shimmered quietly as if listening. Somewhere among those stars, the legacy of humanity's journey continued, strong, steady, and eternal. The galaxy that had once watched humanity with fear now looked upon it with respect. And though there were still challenges, still shadows that lingered beyond known space, there was one truth no one could deny anymore. Humanity had become more than a species. It had become a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can rise and light can return to the heavens. And so, the story that began with betrayal ended with unity. The Envoy's sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy had turned dark once, but because of humanity's courage, the stars now shone brighter than ever before.